309 souls. That's the final, haunting headcount for the USS Cyclops. On a morning in March 1918, a vessel of 20,000 tons, a mass of steel equivalent to roughly 3,000 African elephants, just ceased to be. This wasn't some fragile skiff lost to a sudden squall. This was a titan of the United States Navy, cutting through the swells at the height of the Great War. And yet, the ocean swallowed her whole. No wreckage bobbed on the surface, no oil slick stained the waves, and most chillingly, the wireless room remained silent. Not one single Morse code tap for help. Today, we're going to deconstruct the mechanical failures and the volatile human command that turned this mountain of steel into a ghost. And we'll look at the terrifying physics that allowed a ship this massive to vanish without leaving a single trace behind. Stick around as we dive deep into this maritime mystery. Steel and soot. That's what defined the existence of the naval Collier. To really get what the Cyclops was, you have to understand the desperate hunger of a Navy transitioning from sail to steam. Between 1907 and 1909, the Great White Fleet circled the globe, but it was a massive diplomatic statement that nearly paralyzed the Navy logistically. They were basically chained to foreign ports for coal, effectively held hostage by their own fuel requirements. Congress responded on May 13, 1908, authorizing the construction of fleet colliers. These vessels had to be beasts. The Navy commissioned the Cyclops from William Cramp & Sons in Philadelphia for $900,000. Laid down in 1909 and launched the following year, she stood as a mountain of engineering, 542 feet long, with a beam of 65 feet. Her hold was a cavernous grid of compartments, designed for 11,600 tons of coal or dense fuel oil. She was the lifeblood of the fleet, a gritty, unglamorous vessel that kept the great battleships from becoming drifting scrap metal. Without these coal wagons, the Navy's reach stopped at the horizon. While the ship was a marvel of utility, the man pacing her bridge was a liability. The Naval Manifest identified the commander as Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley, but that name? Well, it was a phantom. Born Johann Friedrich Wichtmann in Hanover, Germany, in 1862, he had discarded his identity after arriving in San Francisco and eventually clawed his way into the officer corps by assuming the name of a dead friend. His crew found his leadership style not just difficult, but terrifying. He was prone to explosive fits of rage, and he often paced the deck, clutching a heavy cane, not as an aid, but as a cudgel. Worley's presence corroded the ship's morale. He was known to drink until his gait faltered, staggering through the corridors of a vessel carrying 309 men. The tension peaked when he chased a crew member across the deck with a sidearm, praising his own authority with screams of incomprehensible orders. A group of the crew eventually filed a formal complaint, citing a toxic, dangerous command environment. The Navy investigated, yet inexplicably, they defended him. They left the crew trapped under his erratic authority, a decision that would prove catastrophic. By 1917, the atmosphere of the Atlantic had darkened. The United States entered World War I, and the Cyclops, already a veteran of South American humanitarian missions, was pressed into the immediate danger of the war zone. Workers at the Norfolk Navy Yard bolted four 4-inch 50 caliber guns onto her decks, transforming a supply ship into a target for German U-boats. In January 1918, she arrived in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Her holds were emptied of coal and filled with 10,800 tons of manganese ore, a vital component for munitions production. This cargo was dense, heavy, and unforgiving. She departed Rio on February 16th, bound for Baltimore, Maryland. She would never arrive. There was an anomaly in her final journey. On March 3rd, the Cyclops made an unscheduled stop in Barbados. The official logs offer little explanation for why she deviated from her course, but the physical state of the ship spoke volumes. The plimsoll line, the critical safety marking that indicates a ship is carrying the maximum safe weight, was completely submerged. She was dangerously overloaded with manganese. Now, here's the thing. Despite this, Worley requested additional supplies in Barbados. It was a move that defied logic. If the ship was already groaning under the weight of her cargo, adding more tonnage was a reckless invitation to disaster. When the scheduled arrival date passed in Baltimore, the silence from the Atlantic became deafening. By mid-March, officials grew frantic. Franklin D. Roosevelt, then the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, oversaw a massive, desperate search. Every island, every cove, and every mile of the shipping lane was scoured. They found nothing. No lifeboats, no scattered cargo, not a single piece of wood. The Atlantic had simply erased her. The Navy officially declared her lost, leaving families in Baltimore and across the country with no answers. Only the hollow ache of the unknown. Speculation swirled in the vacuum left by her disappearance. Because of Worley's German birth and the erratic behavior, rumors of a damned Dutchman betrayal, that he had handed the ship over to a German U-boat, circulated for years. However, post-war searches of German naval records showed no U-boat was in the area, and no German captain ever claimed the sinking. Others whispered of mutiny or a hidden explosive. Yet these theories fail to account for the total absence of debris. A submarine attack, even a sudden one, is likely to leave behind oil, wreckage, or survivors. The silence was absolute. It's the lack of evidence that defies belief. In maritime disasters, the ocean is rarely so surgical. It usually demands a price, leaving behind, at the very least, the detritus of the tragedy. To vanish without a single life ring surfacing suggests a catastrophe so rapid, so total, that the crew had no time to reach for a radio, let alone a raft. The Cyclops was not an isolated tragedy. She was a symptom of a design flaw. She belonged to the Proteus class of colliers. Following her disappearance, her sister ships, the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus, suffered identical, haunting fates. Both vessels vanished in the North Atlantic, both carrying heavy industrial cargo, and both leaving no SOS. This repeating pattern suggests the Cyclops was not merely a victim of war or a cruel captain, but a vessel built with a structural vulnerability that revealed itself only when pushed to her limits. The true culprit likely lies in the physics of her cargo. Manganese ore is punishingly dense, far heavier than coal. When loaded into the holds of the Cyclops, it lowered her center of gravity, but it also created a deadly vulnerability. If the ship encountered heavy seas, a sudden shift in that cargo could have created a slurry effect, causing the ship to list uncontrollably. With her plimsoll line submerged, she had almost no reserve buoyancy. If she took on water in a storm, a 20,000-ton vessel would not just sink, she would capsize and dive straight to the bottom in minutes. We fixate on the mystery, on the romanticized danger of the triangle, but the reality is colder. 309 men were trapped in a steel tube that became a tomb the moment the waterline broke. On a dark, windswept day in March 1918, the USS Cyclops was carrying a load that would have pushed any ship of her era to the brink. She was deep in the water, her decks likely awash, struggling through the heavy, unpredictable churn of the Atlantic. When that dense manganese cargo shifted, the sea did not swallow her so much as pull her beneath its surface, instantly and without mercy. There was no time for a frantic transmission, no time for the men below deck to break through the hatches. The ship simply inverted and slid into the abyss, leaving 309 stories silenced in the crushing pressure of the deep. What remains is not a mystery of another dimension or a ghost story, but the stark, unforgiving weight of 10,800 tons of ore and the cold, unyielding nature of the ocean floor. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please subscribe to the channel.